All right. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, good whatever to you. Thank you for joining us today for our event. I'm not seeing the slides pop up. There we are. All right, lovely. Perfect. All right, let's try that again. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, good whatever to everyone out there. Thank you so much for joining our program today, Financial Services, Future-Proofing Your Digital Transformation Strategy. My name is Sam Fell, and I will be moderating the event today. I'm really excited to talk to you about the agenda for today. You've all seen it. We're super excited to have you join us. We're going to have a really neat set of speakers coming on. For virtual events like this, normally we would be doing this in your backyard. We would be where you could come and see us and shake hands, talk to us, ask us questions. We want to try and recreate that experience to the extent that we can on the virtual platform. So as part of the Zoom platform, there's an ability to ask questions. There's ability to make comments. There's an ability to upvote questions. We would ask that you use that. The panelists, the speakers, will all be monitoring that over the course of our time together at this event. And we would love to get whatever questions or thoughts that you have about the topics that are being discussed as well. We'd like to make this more of a group discussion. As part of that, because we're allowing folks to comment, et cetera, we would appreciate obviously being very respectful of the different folks that are on the line, and keep that in mind when you're putting stuff in the chat. People who are not being nice are going to be booted from the event so that we can make sure that we have a great event for everybody. As far as the agenda goes, we have a bunch of very awesome speakers. So we're really excited. First, Sasha Laburi, our CEO, is going to be speaking. And we also have an analyst from Forrester. Hey, Sasha, good morning. We also have an analyst from Forrester, Joost Hopperman, who's going to be joining us as well to talk a little bit about financial services and the key transformation drivers there. And then we're also really excited to have two practitioners, folks who are in the field right now using these solutions to help drive better outcomes at their companies. The first one is Chafin Bryant from Capital One, and the second one is Keith Blizzard from Fidelity Investments. So they're going to be sharing some of their thoughts with us as well. And finally, at the end, and this is where you all come in, is going to be a panel discussion where the folks who've already spoke, as well as a few others, Geeta Kagathi from TransUnion and Anders Wahlgren from CloudBees, are going to be talking about some of the things that we've already discussed in the different presentations and give us a more open forum to discuss those things. So without any further ado, and unless there's anything from my colleagues, I would pass it over to Sasha Laburi. Sasha.
All right. Thanks a lot, Sam. So today I'm gonna talk about obviously financial services, but the blueprint for digital transformation. And first of all, I wanted to go through some numbers. So they might look as random numbers, but they're not. 175. So 175, that's the average age of the top 4 banks in the US. 175 years, and it's pretty amazing to imagine what you know. It's huge. It's an average, but it's such a huge number. I quickly checked just to put that in context what it meant. 175 years ago, it was 1845, and for our US guest, that's when Florida became the 27th state, Texas the 28th, and that's when the baseball rules were defined for the first time. So it's not exactly yesterday, as you can see. So 175 years is the average. As you can imagine, a lot of adaptation had to go through the banks to survive for such a long time. And also a lot of mergers. So that leads us to the second number, 35. 35 major merger and acquisitions in the last 40 years. So about one every year, a major M&A transaction takes place in that space. So it's a very competitive, very tough space. 25, so what is 25? That's on average the investment window for new system of record. So when we talk about a system of record, we're talking about obviously the backend systems that will record all of the transaction, and so they have requirement to be extremely HA and so on, things, kicks or COBOL. We're talking about 25 to 30 years of lifespan for those systems. So it better exist for a long while, and we obviously still see kicks and COBOL used at length in lots of financial institutions still very much. And last number, to put in perspective with the previous numbers, it's 5 years, or actually more from 3 to 5 years and shrinking. It's typically the investment window for the system of engagement. So think about the front end of the banking systems. That's where you have all of the customer facing application. That's where revenue gets generated. That's where you capture eyeballs and so on. So eyeballs. So you know, a big difference between the 25 to 30 years versus the 3 to 5 years for the front end system. So that's really underlying what the industry has to deal with. So if we think about the business drivers, no sector is obviously immune to competition, and certainly not these days with software that's truly eating the world. But finance has been and is one of the most competitive space. And what's interesting to see is that finance is also very much technology forward. It's very aggressive in looking at new ways to do things to be more competitive. So we're seeing continuous innovation, continuous optimization, continuous risk mitigation, and we're going to be talking about that, right? On one hand, this desire to go faster, but on the other hand, these requirements that finance institutions have to really be rock solid, right? And you have lots of compliance holes and so on to respect. And so how do you go fast and how do you remain strong are really two very big challenges. So if we think about this situation, we can look at it through multiple lenses. So first, from a governance standpoint, right? It's always top of mind in the finance industry. How do you assure the separation of duties and enforce those access control, right? That's a key part, obviously, of any finance institution. At the same time, what we're talking about, right, with 175 years, adaptability. How do you incorporate new legacy and hybrid technology into those release trains you're going to have? How do you have processes that span all of those different type of applications? The adaptability is absolutely core to the challenge ahead. Scalability, very important. How can I scale across geographies, across teams, across application environments? So you have multiple ways to scale, obviously, but it's also a key way to look at your digital transformation and how you want to go after this digital transformation. And last but not least, certainly, is manageability. You need to look at your digital transformation with this lens as well. How are you going to be managing your disparate teams, make them happy, speed up the releases, and still get at the same time the analytics that you need to identify the issues, prove compliance, be able to highlight area where you can potentially go faster and so on. So this manageability aspect is obviously extremely important as part of your digital transformation. Yet the financial sector faces a number of challenges, right? It's certainly no stranger to the disruption we're seeing. So first of all, obviously the merger and acquisition, they are happening. We've seen that it's about one mega merger once a year, but there's a lot of more local M&As that happen. It's a lot of work. It's tough. It disrupts the business in lots of ways. You also have new players entering the market at all time, and we certainly see that these days, where you have a lot of new companies popping up and attacking some specific segments of the finance sector, right? So not necessarily the big banks coming up with all of the portfolio of services, but deciding to go very aggressively after a specific segment of the market. We're also seeing disruption in terms of new platforms and backend systems emerging. We're seeing things like Kubernetes and serverless. So how do you embrace all of those new systems? Well, first and foremost, before you can see this as an opportunity, it's going to come as a disruption to all of the things you're doing. And obviously, there is an onslaught of new regulation. It's a new normal. It's constant, and your system needs to adapt to those. So it's triggers that come up and disrupt the normal flow that you would otherwise be following. You have also processes, and obviously financial institutions must have extremely strong processes. They're typically extremely great at processes because for a simple reason, right? Their business is the lifeblood of the world economy. So if the financial sector goes down, we're gonna have problems that go much further than just the financial sector. It could put the economy at a halt. So the processes that sustain these financial institutions is extremely important, and they need to be extremely well understood. So that's hard, but when you put that in perspective with all of the M&A that's happening, right? You end up with layers essentially of processes from different companies, different institutions joining together, and you have to manage all of those layers of processes built on top of each other. And so, it would be ideal if every bank would do exactly the same thing and use the same system, but every bank is obviously using a different system in a slightly different way with their own processes and so on. And so capturing all of those processes as one meaningful thing is a big challenge. Silos and sprawl, there is also organic growth and M&A activity, and that leads to lots of different teams that can be spread in geographical area, lots of different tools, location, endpoint, you have ATM vendors. You can imagine the list, right? But every acquisition doesn't come just with their own processes, but with their own spread, their own silo, and it creates even more of those to manage. Compliance and proof. Obviously, when we talk about financial institutions, it's hard to not talk about compliance, but it's very hard, obviously, to maintain constant compliance with all of the regulations. But as the technology evolves, it forces the regulators to also keep up, and it's not necessarily always the case, right? We've seen how much time it took for the cloud to really be validated as something that financial institution can use and so on. So it's really a desire on one hand to go fast and to adopt new technologies, but those also need to be approved by the regulatory institutions, and that creates additional burden. And as if that was not enough, there is a lot more, right? We've seen it. 2020, probably everybody will remember 2020. It has completely changed the way we operate, and that happened, it seems, in a heartbeat, right? We're getting used to it now, but frankly, it's a radical departure from where we were just 6 months ago. So banks also had to adapt to this remote workforce, closed branches, and what that means? Well, that means more processes, that means more tools. And it's always hard for a lot of financial institutions to talk about being remote and spreading things, right? It's better controlled in-house, but from one day to the next, you have thousands, tens of thousands of workers now working from home. And that radically changes your processes, that radically changes how you see security, compliance, and obviously it provides potentially a much greater risk exposure if you are not doing the right things. And so this year of 2020 will remain, I think, in the memories of lots of businesses, but certainly from a banking standpoint as well. And if you sprinkle a bit of negative interest rates in a growing number of countries, it certainly adds to the fun. So now would be a good time to talk about our definition of DevOps success, right? And there is a lot to unpack here, so I'm not going to do all of it here. it really boils down to doing it with the right people, the right processes, and with the right underlying technology. And if you do it this way, then you can get a lot of things that you would potentially think are incompatible at first, right? You can really get to a place where releases and patching becomes boring, and the good boring, right? Non-events with the things you can do with minimal staff and effort and minimal risk. And that's extremely important. And that's one of the key leadership, key outcome you can get out of a successful DevOps strategy. You can have new platform for deployment, and you can refactor your existing objects for that new target, and you can be done. So it gives a lot more flexibility. And then it leads to unprecedented visibility as well into the efficiency and the effectiveness of your delivery, of your teams, of your application development. And it can also lead to satisfy your auditors in a matter of minutes versus days or weeks. So all of that is possible, right? You can get this velocity, but at the same time, you get to satisfy your auditors extremely fast because it's all part of the same process. So I think it's a very important area to spend some time, because sometimes with all of those factors, right? Speed, compliance, predictability, adaptability, it seems like we're looking at two completely separated things, right? We feel like we need to choose between agility and control. We have to choose between consistency and portability. But it's not true, because actually agility does not sacrifice control. Consistency does not preclude adaptability or flexibility or reusability. You can have all of them at the same time, but what it requires is to build that muscle. And if you look at some of the research, like the DORA research that some of you might know, it's very clear. The more you're going to be building that muscle, the more you're going to be releasing with speed, the faster you're going to do it, and the less you're going to fail. And once you fail, it's going to take you much, much less time to recover from those failures. So it's really like a muscle, and you need to think about it as a muscle. And if you train it, you're going to become much stronger at all of those things, but you need to train it. You need to do more of it, not less of it. And so that's why, you know, sometimes there is obvious fear associated to the desire to go faster and to release more, but you shouldn't fear that. You should see this as learning, as growing your muscle. And once you get there, great things happen. So how do you do that? And so can we talk about a quote unquote blueprint for success? Well, we've been working with some of the largest financial institutions in the world for years. And here are some of the things we've seen be repeated over and over again. So first, you should model and automate absolutely everything. Model your releases, your application, pipeline, and make it into well-rehearsed work across toolchain, right? Think really about an assembly line, essentially in any industry. We have to get there and do the same thing in software. And the reason you need to do that, because it's going to bring you consistency and compliance, because you're always going to be doing the same thing, and how you do things is actually captured in those holes. And Anders, who is on this call today, and we'll be talking later today, says automation is auditing, right? And that's very important to understand. By codifying the rules into the actual logic, it also provides the foundation for your auditing requirements. So automation is auditing. The second thing is to provide pipelines and automation as a service. You really need to provide and get to a place where you get to a catalog, a self-service catalog of easily versioned and refactored standard environment and components, right? You don't want everything that you start to be hard. You want to make sure that you can get started and do the right thing from the get-go and help your teams to achieve that. And so that means self-service catalog. The next one is to adopt new technology safely. So take non-prescriptive model-based approach to make experimentation safe and auditable. That's also very important. And you're going to have to adopt a lot of new technology. So that's really something you need to do at the core of your strategy. The next one is extremely important as well. Embrace, don't replace. You have many tools in your tool chains. It's not one tool chain, it's many tool chain. We talked about M&A and how lots of teams come with their own processes, their own way of doing things. You have a lot of that. So one way to solve that theoretically is to say, well, we're going to replace everything and we're going to standardize on a very strict set of things. This is not going to work. You'd better start from the get-go thinking you're going to be embracing things. It doesn't mean you don't want to reduce the number of vendors you have. You don't want to bring some order in your house. That's totally fine. But your strategy should recognize that innovation exists everywhere in DevOps. You have new tools, innovative solutions coming up every week pretty much. And I'm sure you're going to have teams with different needs. If you look at the mobile front-end team versus the e-commerce team versus the back-end teams, they're all going to come with new desires, new solutions that are important. And so to be able to embrace that and have a strategy for embracing that diversity rather than try to fight against the wind is going to be a lot more productive. And then you need to monitor and track releases. You need to have absolute 360 visibility into everything. Build and release status, success and test completion rates, bottlenecks, dependencies, environments, deployments, point tools, approvals, gates, environment inventories, and so on. So it seems like a lot, and it is a lot, and there is a lot more. But you absolutely need to set in place the right tools, the right systems that make sure you gather all of that data and are able to have a 360 visibility into absolutely everything. And then last but certainly not least, you need to have built-in security and compliance. This cannot be an extra step or process. It's a way I've heard this being said is, I think it's a great way to say it. In DevSecOps, the sec is silent. Okay, so if you do DevOps right, you absolutely need to embed the security aspect as part of your processes, and security will emerge as part of that because you're doing the right thing as part of the process. You need everything to be reusable with pre-built security, compliance pipeline that work across all of the teams, applications, and environments. And you need to have the right processes as part of that to make sure that the testing of security, for example, with the right approval gates and checks and so on, happens as part of your workflows, as part of your pipelines. And if you do that, then you can detect any issue with your security. You can also detect drift that happen and be able to apply security check when drift is being detected. You can also implement some quick rollback and kill switch controls through feature flags, for example. So there are a bunch of ways to make sure that your security and compliance is going to be a lot more stronger by using some of the tools in your DevOps toolbox. And last but not least, what are the outcomes? Well, the outcomes is really to be able to have new application at any speed or scale, right? And that's certainly true in the world we live in today. There is a desire to be able to go to market much faster with new solution. There is an opportunity, there is a requirement from new requirements. We've seen that in 2020 with some of the debt, with the loans that were provided in lots of countries. There was a need to provide very quickly new applications out with strong compliance. Well, if you don't have the right foundation to make that happen, you're really going to struggle with that. But that's really an outcome of doing DevOps right and having a strong digital transformation strategy. You can do it at higher efficiency and effectiveness. That's very important. You don't need to sacrifice your efficiency by doing things right. Au contraire, you're going to get your developers and your teams happier because they can focus on the things that will really differentiate your company, that will enable them to have a true impact and not do the manual or manual compliance or what's not, which is really, really painful. And then you get secure and compliant in development, in release, in production. By doing the right thing as part of the workflow, as part of the process you define, then everything gets the same level of security and compliance. You don't need to tweak things in release or in production. You actually do not want to do that. What you need to investigate is the process, not specific people or way of doing things. So I hope this session is going to be greatly useful. I think there is an amazing opportunity right now to go in digital transformation. What we're seeing actually is, despite some of the situation we're seeing in 2020, a lot of the organization decide to double down on digital transformation, because if there is one thing that will always be up, always be able to provide differentiation, no matter what the constraints are in terms of being able to go outside or whatever, it is software solutions. So it's more important than ever to double down on digital transformation and be ready for that new era. So thank you, everybody. And as our next guest, I'd like to welcome Jost Hopperman. And Jost is Vice President and Principal Analyst serving application development and delivery at Forrester. And he's going to talk about key transformation drivers and strategies for financial services. Welcome, Jost.
Thank you very much indeed. And once again, good morning, good afternoon, pretty much depending on the time zone you are in. And thank you very much to CloudBees for giving me the opportunity to talk a little bit about one of my favorite topics, which is about transformation in financial services. What are the reasons? What are strategies? And I think we will basically focus on a couple of data points describing the current state of transformation in financial services, but also on some architectural ideas that may or not, I hope they will, provide some food for thought for one or two of you. So with that, let's start, and let's have a couple of, spend a couple of seconds, maybe minutes, on the key areas of digital transformation. And in the first step, it is certainly about digital experiences. We can clearly see that digital experiences are about, let's call it the digital front end, where we can, in the first step, serve customers, financial services customers, banking customers, in an easy, effective, emotional, convenient, use any positive adjective here, way as far as possible. And this is certainly something that is a key element of digital financial services, of digital banking. Another area is certainly digital operations. And to make a long story short, it's about delivering better outcomes. It's about productivity, efficiency, seamless processes. And I think it becomes very clear that the two jointly, digital experience, digital operations, will deliver what I like to call true digital banking, true digital financial services, because it's about end-to-end digital processes that help the customers to get better services. But more and more so, it's also about the employees. It's about employee experience, because this will help employees to work more effectively and also to work in a more seamless fashion using better experiences. And I also dare to say that these two areas are certainly areas where I see definitely plenty of impact when it comes to the current pandemic situation. Sasha already mentioned home working, and certainly I'm seeing many financial service institutions working on providing better solutions for their home workers, because the existing solutions have never been meant to support such a large workforce from home. And they were never meant to provide support for any kind of broader end-to-end work. And then it's certainly also about customers that are now preferring digital channels even more than before. So it's also about improving these systems, scaling them up, and the like. And pretty much the same is true for digital operations. On the one hand side, it's about people in branches, in offices, that cannot work there anymore. So they have to work with colleagues that used to sit next to them remotely, and consequently companies are starting to reconsider how they can change the way how they can support their workforce. And then it's certainly also about other aspects of productivity and efficiency. Let's use an example of those countries where we have plenty of COVID-19 specific loans, and some banks are certainly struggling to work on originating all of these loans in a way that does not create more risk by basically reducing the quality of the risk assessments. But let's move further with the 4 areas of digital transformation. Another area that is very important are digital ecosystems, where we basically look at supporting partnerships, where banks, financial services firms can position themselves in different areas of the value chain, where they can, for example, provide a marketplace, where they can provide products and services that will be sold by someone else, or whether they may just offer know your customer capabilities. So it's really about the ability to support the business of a financial services firm in a broader way, an ecosystem where a bank can have multiple roles in different business constellations. Then the 4th area is definitely about digital innovation. It's about pushing the frontier further and further. As we know, it is also important to compete with all kinds of emerging competitors in the financial services space. And it's also about pushing the barriers in the other areas, in digital experience, digital operations, and digital ecosystems. And certainly when we look at innovation, as well as ecosystems, these are definitely areas where we, even more than in experience and operations, we need a very flexible and agile architecture. So the question is certainly, how do financial services firms feel? Are they ready to support this kind of thing? Are they just ready to support their customers in the best possible fashion? So let's have a look at some data points from Forrester's Financial Services Architecture Survey in its most recent version, where we basically looked at the question, are financial services firms ready for the future? At the more detailed level, we said, are you in a good position with your infrastructure, with your applications to serve your customers in the best possible way? And interestingly, the response was 81%. And as you may already guess, because of the color of the 81%, this is not about those companies that feel that they are best positioned to serve their customers in the best possible way, just to the opposite. These are the companies that clearly say, no, we are not yet in that position. And actually, the European financial services firms were slightly more optimistic. The North American ones were slightly more pessimistic. But in general, independent of the region, the financial services firms expect, roughly 4/5 expect, that they will be in a position to deliver these differentiating experiences with digital experiences, digital operations, etc., within the next 4 to 5 years. And certainly, the pandemic may create some delay. 2024 may become 2025 or 2026, but nevertheless, this is certainly some kind of challenge that banks, financial services firms in general, need to tackle. So I get this not a huge surprise that many companies in financial services are very aware that they have to undertake transformation. In the same financial services architecture survey I mentioned earlier, we found that 88% of the financial services firms are already working on transformation or plan to do so within the next couple of years. And again, in Europe, this number was slightly smaller. In North America, the number was definitely higher. But on average, this is the number at a global level. So with this huge percentage of companies working on transformation or starting to transform soon, even it's only about early phases of planning, it's certainly interesting to see what kind of business drivers are high on the list when it comes to transformation. So let's have a look again at some survey data from the same survey. And we found that a couple of things, managing cost, channels, sales capabilities are comparably low on the list, although they belong to the top 11 drivers. And then we have a second level where we are basically looking at the past. It's about managing technology and application risk. And basically this topic is much more important for North American companies than for, European companies. We are looking at forward-looking technology and architecture to support, for example, digital ecosystems to create an environment that can foster innovation. But it's also about becoming more digital in a way that touches processes, architectures, maybe even culture and the like. And interestingly, this was about the same percentage in Europe and North America. On top, we are looking at business-oriented drivers for transformation. Product innovation, market share increase, time to market, time to value. There's a couple of different bits and flavors here. So market share increase was more important in Europe. Product innovation was more important in North America. But overall, these are, at a global level, drivers that fall into the 30% category. On top, we are seeing a single area that relates nicely to digital operations. It's about efficiency and productivity, and which remains in the 40% category in Europe, by just so, and which shows a stronger interest in North America. And no surprise, the most important topic remains customer experience, and again, slightly lower in Europe and slightly higher in North America. So a kind of interesting set focusing on business, particularly the top 5 drivers, and also a sound mixture of other aspects when it comes to the next 6 drivers of a transformation. So the question is certainly, how can we make transformation real, and how can we manage transformation in a way that allows us to mitigate risk? So the bottom line is, when we look at today's application landscapes, we typically see kind of a pretty monolithic approach. My most favorite example, a 40-year-old assembler-based core banking system, was shut down only a few months ago, maybe 12 months ago. I would have to look up the exact number, but it's basically about a pretty monolithic system with system of engagement aspects inside, as in system aspect that should foster rapid change, that should react quickly to new requirements, and also system of record aspects inside that are meant to protect data, to ensure consistency of legally relevant information. So this means traditional core solution has a pretty unhealthy combination of capabilities as in system of engagement and in system of record, because they are fundamentally different. So the key question is, how can we move to a more modern solution, what Forrester likes to call a digital banking platform, ideally to a layered solution with a lot of decoupling, APIs, and other modern ingredients, while avoiding too much transformation risk. And what we have found is certainly that there is a pretty clear view on that when it comes to the structure of that approach. Let's have again a look at some data from the Financial Services Architecture Survey. We asked, how will your firm work with the challenge of core banking modernization? Okay, this time certainly a view on banking as opposed to financial services in general. We found that 35% of the companies told us that they think they need to modernize their core banking solution, and they will replace it. It doesn't not yet say too much about how they want to do it, but this is basically the overarching goal. And further, 35% told us they want to keep the core in place, and they want to build new capabilities around it. And again, this does not say too much about whether they want to shut down the existing traditional core at some point in time or not. And again, the approach of building new capabilities around an existing traditional core enjoys a little bit more followers in North America than in Europe. There are a couple of reasons for that. Maybe we can discuss this separately, but the bottom line is both approaches have their followers. The question is basically how to do that in a proper way. So let's have a look at some architectural layering that we have started observing a couple of years. And we call this digital banking platform architecture. And we believe that such a kind of layered architecture can offer a lot of flexibility, a lot of ability to foster change. When we look at this architecture, we see it's about one layer supporting digital experiences. It's about exposing APIs to the outside world, which is basically the layer for completely focusing on the experience of customers and of employees. And don't get me wrong here, APIs are certainly also within the architecture, but I won't touch that topic too much, simply because otherwise I would probably need another hour. I asked CloudBee for that, but sorry, I couldn't get the time. But to be more serious, the next two layers are what Forrester likes to call digital core banking. You could also say the engagement layer. The banking entity layer is about a domain-driven design concept. So you would probably focus on a domain or a banking entity like the customer, like the account. And the aggregation layer would allow to either compose richer business capabilities or to create workflows such as loan origination with the entities or account origination with the entities, customer and account. Underneath, in what we call the lean core, we have, first of all, the data maintenance layer. In a first step, this is something that is meant to provide a stable set of data APIs to the banking entity layer so that there's some kind of isolation between multiple types of data stores and the different, likely microservices-based banking entities. And then we certainly have different types of databases and also long-term data stores, for example, to feed analytical systems and to teach, for example, AI systems. So the next question is certainly, how does this relate to 35% of companies replacing the core and 35% of the companies wanting to build new capabilities in line with a more modern architecture? So let's have a look at a traditional core banking solution. And let's have a look at how these two systems could coexist. In the first step, we are seeing banks exposing functional APIs with core banking solutions, exposing functional APIs. This is some kind of pretty typical approach. You can hook these functional APIs from a traditional system in the aggregation layer. It's kind of a solution approach that does not fully leverage the value of digital banking platform architecture, because the aggregation layer will be reduced to kind of an ESB, but it certainly works. And some banks have also tried to hook the functional APIs into the banking entity layer, and this can work as long as the functional APIs are alone or in conjunction with a couple of others, aligned with a banking entity such as the customer, for example. However, this is certainly not the best approach. What we've also seen are companies using data APIs. They can do that because they have access to the source code, or because they build the system in-house, because they have access to the source code of a former off-the-shelf solution, or because their vendor, for example, in case of an end-of-life core banking solution, build new data APIs into an old solution, which is certainly a nice cash flow for that particular vendor. But bottom line is, if you have data APIs available, you can hook them into the data maintenance layer. The data maintenance layer can take care of the APIs to the blue layers of the architecture. And the data maintenance layer can also take care of synchronizing information between the various data sources, because, for example, a customer may reside in the traditional core banking solution, and additional data, say geospatial data, may reside in a specific database in the lean core. So there are certainly combinations that need to be taken care of. Is this the only good approach? Let's have a look at another one. The next one is replication. And when Forrester started talking about digital core banking and other topics in the space, replication was certainly kind of a workaround. For example, I've seen a bank that used to go for an off-the-shelf digital engagement solution. So basically a large share of the blue pieces on the right side, but neither they nor their vendor could open their traditional core so that the new solution could, in some way or the other, work with the traditional core. So the outcome was they built some kind of temporary data store and used batch-driven replication to synchronize data back and forth. It certainly worked. It was not ideal. It was not real-time from a customer experience perspective. And in endgame situations, they had a couple of minor discussions with their regulator because the data was not completely consistent between the left and the right side. But it works. For the last, say, 2 years maybe, we have seen more modern replication approaches. And we are seeing banks and also vendors on the off-the-shelf banking software side using streaming capabilities such as the ones provided by Kafka for more real-time oriented replication. And consequently, we are now having 2 types of replication as in wire data, also 2 types of good coexistence between the old and the new world, as in data APIs and real-time replication. But is this something that is only about coexistence? Because coexistence would mean you have to keep the traditional core in place. Right now, we can see that we can build new capabilities around the existing core. However, I guess, and this is something very important, as soon as we have all capabilities and all data moved to the digital side of the picture, we can certainly switch off the traditional core. This basically means that we are avoiding the continuous change that comes with typical gradual migration approaches. It's more about continuous change, and there are only 2 times when the traditional core will really change. One is when it gets opened via one of the options I mentioned earlier, and the second time is when it basically gets shut down. And when we have this new core, we certainly have to keep in mind that the new core can run in multiple environments, which basically means we are talking about the various flavors of the cloud. And earlier on, Sasha said, hey, many banks are working slightly different from the others. And this is certainly true. This already tells us one of the challenges of 100% SaaS-like applications, because the more standardized a solution is, the more difficult it will be for a bank to use them because they would have to standardize the operations first. So we have to look at different flavors of the cloud. For example, do not see a lot of 100% SaaS options, SaaS kind of deployments in the financial services industry, as in 100%, because they do not give any control to a bank. They do not give any kind of options to differentiate. So what I'm seeing more is certainly flavors like SaaS-like, which is basically also something you could so-call SaaS-light, as in there is some control, there is some kind of difference between the different implementations. However, there's certainly also additional pieces, for example, cloud-based ASP, where a banking application or a financial services application in general would sit on infrastructure or platform as a service. There's certainly also some kind of capability where we are looking at private cloud infrastructure that is exclusively managed for a given customer, for a given bank, or that may even reside on-prem of a bank, so that they have the ability to use certain technology benefits of cloud infrastructure, but they do not have to standardize the operations as such. But at the same time, we obviously also see that if you go for a solution that is very much under the control of a given bank, it's certainly also about reduced economies of scale. At the same point in time, also lower commercial flexibility, because these contracts are typically longer term compared to solutions higher up in this picture here. But at the same time, we also have to keep in mind that this kind of solution tells us that as the more the standardized solution out of the cloud in the cloud is, the less differentiation you can achieve with the bank. So consequently, I guess there's no one size fits all approach for each and every functionality for each and every bank. It's always a case by case decision where a financial services institution wants to differentiate and where a financial services institution thinks it's better to go for a highly standardized, low cost capability as such. So what does it mean, and what kind of, let's say, current situation do we see in financial services? Let's have a look at some survey data. And I guess, don't worry here, I do not want to run through all of the data, but I guess it is pretty interesting that if you look at financial services specific capabilities, at banking specific capabilities, the SaaS and SaaS-like are certainly flavors of the cloud that are not the majority, with one exception. And this is about horizontal capabilities like general ledger, like HR, where we certainly see a huge amount of deployments, but other areas are typically not yet that much in the focus of financial services firms. Again, don't get me wrong here, there are certainly differences. In North America, we are seeing more deployments in the cloud than in other geographies, but nevertheless, the bottom line is horizontal is a stronger focal area than vertical capabilities such as core banking or internet banking. So what are the reasons for that? And actually, I would like to show you the three major obstacles for cloud deployments. And basically, one obstacle is certainly about available in-house skills, which surprised me a bit when I saw the survey results, to be frank. But I learned later on it's not so much about deploying a single cloud solution, whether it is really cloud infrastructure or a SaaS-like. It is more about orchestration in a multi-cloud environment. This is also something that I learned from a couple of sources, different financial services firms in different regions, and so on. Another obstacle is certainly regulation. And interestingly, regulation is the single most important obstacle in Europe and the least important obstacle in North America. So it's definitely about regulation, country-specific topics, the inability in some countries to move data, customer data outside of the country and the like. And finally, it's about the perception of no acceptable banking offerings, and I guess this is exactly that. It was probably 5 years ago, maybe 6, 7 years ago, but today there are probably more vendors offering banking capabilities out of the cloud than there are customers. So what does it mean? Are now all banks moving their capabilities to full SaaS-like and SaaS solutions? To some degree. So what are the investment plans here? We found that between 89 and 94% of financial services firms want to go into the direction of architectural elements such as microservices, but also want to use more cloud-based capabilities. What does it mean at a more detailed level? So it's basically the 89 to 94% represent those companies that invest in the capabilities, plan to increase their investment, or start investing in these areas soon. So it's definitely about APIs, no surprise, I guess, because it's about internal APIs, exposing capabilities to the outside world, consuming capabilities from the outside world. It's definitely about cloud-based infrastructure, as in using scalable capabilities for a more agile environment. It's about even more horizontal business capabilities. So it will become even a more dominant space for now. But it's also about cloud-based banking capabilities in that as soon as these obstacles are somehow managed, banks want to move more toward banking capabilities in the cloud, whether it is cloud-based ASP or SaaS-like is a different story, but this is an objective here. And finally, it's definitely also about microservices-based architectures in that banks are already deploying their own sets of microservices. They're trying to buy their own sets of microservices. And certainly, many banks consider microservices as a way to more flexibly and faster deliver business capabilities. And I guess this is a key here. From my point of view, the survey results clearly show us that financial services firms at banks want to speed up their transformation approach. They want to be in a position to be faster and certainly also to be more flexible and agile as far as new business capabilities are concerned, but certainly in line with regulation. So what would that mean in reality? And don't worry, I do not want to talk through the universe of different combination of transformation strategies. I just want to use this picture to offer you one example from the real world. This is basically about a large financial services firms that is currently undertaking a transformation project. It's kind of a project with a larger objective, but it's also basically planning for the next couple of years, for the next foreseeable project, sorry for that. And they're focusing on a combination of buy plus build and best in class. What basically means on one side, they're certainly buying capabilities. They pick certain best in class capabilities. Whether they are on-prem or cloud-based capabilities is a different story, but they want to also extend these capabilities from a functional perspective by using, by developing new differentiating capabilities, both on the side of digital experiences and on the side of digital operations. And to do so, they want to use continuous transformation, which basically means they deploy bits and pieces continuously. They have defined projects for the next deliveries, but they do not have a firm plan for the year 2022 or 2023. And they go for a mixture of on-premise and full SaaS, in that they are still reluctant to run their operational systems in the cloud using cloud infrastructure. They have a kind of cloud infrastructure stack they run in their own data center, but everything else, the entire CI/CD pipeline, when it comes to custom built solutions, when it comes to new modules and patches coming in from their software vendors, this entire space is run in the cloud, and it gets delivered until it reaches a gate to the operational solutions. With that, I guess it's time to basically look at the future. As in, what can you do? What can a bank do to become a member of these banks that think they will be best positioned to serve their customers in 2024 or maybe even 2026? I guess it's certainly about changing infrastructure, changing applications, changing tools, changing processes, and most likely also culture in a way that supports digital transformation, because it does not help to have great infrastructure without the necessary culture. It does not help at all to have great applications if there is no tooling in place to basically leverage the agility that these new applications can provide. So the bottom line is, if you do not yet work on transformation, please start your transformation anytime soon. And with that, I've reached the end of my slide deck. Thank you very much for your interest. And if there are any questions, please let us know.
Fantastic. Joost, thank you very much. We're getting some good commentary and some questions in the chat. I want to encourage everyone to keep those coming. Fantastic conversation with Sasha and Joost. And I'm very excited now to start the next section, which is to really get into, first, we're going to ask you folks a polling question. We've talked a lot in the past two sessions about top business drivers. And so our first polling question is, what are your top business drivers? And you don't have to just check one, you can check all that apply, but what are the things that you and your organization are focused on? Joost and Sasha both just talked through some of them, and I'm sure we're going to be hearing more of them later. So go ahead and enter in your votes. While you're doing that, I'm going to actually introduce our next speaker. There he is. All right. So we're very thrilled, like I said, to have folks who are in the field making this stuff happen for financial institutions. The first folk we want to introduce is Chafin. Hey, Chafin, how you doing? Oh,
I'm
you're
doing
muted
great.
is how you're doing.
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
There you are. Well, thank you for being here. It's our pleasure. Can you introduce yourself to the audience, and then I'll let you kick off your presentation.
Absolutely. I'll go ahead and jump in here.
Wonderful.
Are you able to see my screen, Sam?
I can, yes.
Awesome. So hello, everyone. I hope that you're having an awesome day so far in whatever time zone you're joining us from. Like Sam mentioned, I'm Chafin Bryant, and I'll be sharing some thoughts with you today on DevOps with a $. That is DevOps and delivering software in the finance industry. So a quick introduction, if we haven't met before, my name is Chafin Bryant. I would describe myself as a curious technologist and passionate people leader. And I've spent about the past decade working and leading in the web, consumer, enterprise, and financial tech spaces. I've been at Capital One for the past 5 years, focused on operational stability, automation, software delivery, and developer experience. And in my current role, I lead the Enterprise Jenkins platform team at Capital One. So like I said, today I'm going to be talking about DevOps and delivery in the finance industry. I'm going to share a little bit of information about Capital One's posture towards DevOps and what day-to-day DevOps and software delivery looks like in my world. And then with that perspective understood and that background, I'll share some of the challenges. Sasha and Joost covered some of those things that are also on my list as far as challenges that are unique to the finance industry and some best practices for DevOps success that I and Capital One have learned through our journeys. And then I'll also spend a little bit of time talking about some of the challenges that we're all navigating in this new normal remote environment and how we're tackling them, some tips hopefully on how we continue to operate effectively and deliver on our key goals. So jumping right in there to Capital One's posture towards DevOps. I would describe Capital One as a technology company that happens to be a bank. And so as a result, right, with that posture as a technology company, Capital One's investing in top engineering talent so that we have the capability and the resources and the talent bench to deliver on that goal and that kind of mission and that vision. We're focused on building software collaboratively. For one thing to mention, leveraging open source software and contributing back to the open source community. We're developing software using agile methodologies and DevOps practices to speed up our software delivery processes. On the technology side, we're developing software on modern RESTful API microservice architectures and leveraging big data and fast data technologies to enable real-time decisioning. And the reason I give that information and can call those things out is also, like I said, as Joost and Sasha both mentioned, organizational support is an important driver of our tech transformation and our DevOps efforts at Capital One. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. But a key takeaway I want to call out there is existential flex is a key element of DevOps and delivery success. And if you're not familiar with that term existential flex, it's a concept from Simon Sinek's book, The Infinite Game. I highly recommend it if you haven't read it. And in it, he talks about and describes existential flex as the concept of a significant directional shift to advance your cause. And so organizational support for the ability to be flexible is a key element of DevOps delivery and success. But there's a reason they call it a DevOps journey, right? It takes time and effort and planning to go anywhere on any kind of journey. Capital One's DevOps and Agile transformation has been a significant multi-year journey. And we focused on delivering high-quality working software in a consistent, safe, and efficient manner. Those changes are also multidimensional, right? It's not just technology evolution, it's not just cultural transformation and all the change that makes both of those things a reality. It's a combination of both. And so the key takeaway I would share there is start somewhere, right? I really like the analogy of a merry-go-round. Picture you 8 years old on a playground, right? And you're pushing as hard as you can to get this thing moving, and the result at first isn't that radical. But as you start building inertia, the revolutions of the merry-go-round, and in the analogy, the evolution of your organization happens faster and faster. And eventually it actually begins to pull you along, right? Because you have that momentum built. So what does DevOps look like at Capital One? I have the word massive underlined and bolded there because I think that's a good way to put it. DevOps at true enterprise scale is a massive undertaking. We have over 10,000 engineers at Capital One. We have thousands of internal applications. We're delivering tens of thousands of monthly production changes to our software, our platform. And another interesting statistic I thought I'd throw in there, just because the scale, it even boggles me working with it every day, is we have over 350,000 internal GitHub repos. That's a lot of code for our applications, for our DevOps tooling and practices, for our pipelines, all of that. It's massive, right, is a good way to describe it. And we provide, we meaning myself and my teams within the teams within the delivery experience organization at Capital One, provide centralized DevOps tooling for the entire organization. So to give you some context on that, right, I own the Enterprise Jenkins platform. My team delivers this platform for that large developer community, close to 7,000 engineers to leverage. We have over 500,000 Jenkins jobs, automation pipelines on the platform. The platform is used to facilitate 50,000 build, test, deploy activities every day. The footprint is comprised of several thousand cloud resources deployed in AWS, and all working together to provide the infrastructure on top of which all of that activity happens. We have 90 and counting separate Jenkins stacks that are used by various teams within the organization to deliver their software. And the platform that we manage and provide to our developer community provides deployment capabilities into several hundred separate AWS accounts. And that my internal Jenkins DevOps team provides that entire platform. And the reason I call that out is from a DevOps viewpoint perspective, my team is involved in and working with DevOps practices, agile delivery methodologies on a daily basis. And I like to say we're closer to the center of the onion, right? We're a DevOps team providing DevOps tooling to DevOps teams who are creating software. And the at-scale platform that I just shared some statistics about, right? Our ability for around a dozen people to provide a platform at that scale to that user base, our ability to do that and to manage and to deliver and keep compliant and updated that scale of a platform is in large part through our adoption of DevOps principles, DevOps automation, and the flexibility and efficiency that those processes give us. So with that background and some context into kind of what my day-to-day looks like and Capital One's posture towards DevOps and what DevOps looks like at Capital One, let's jump into some of the challenges that are unique to the finance industry and talk through those. And those things these are examples, right? They're not all explicitly specific to the finance industry, but for those of you joining us, I'm sure some of these things will resonate with you. Some of them were also called out in the previous presentations. So first one there, right? Stringent change management processes can be tough to automate. I think we can all nod our head at this one. Processes that oftentimes are oriented around manual, human-based activities, right, are things that can be tough to automate. There are significant regulatory and compliance requirements that we're navigating and kind of operating in the environment of. And those challenges are definitely significant. We also provide critical services to our customers, right? Stability is paramount with our tools and our technology and the services that we're providing. And so there's always a goal to make sure that those things are stable, the changes being introduced. Sometimes, as we're talking about technology evolution, massive changes are things that are not affecting the stability and availability of those platforms. Also, transforming legacy tech is hard work, right? Yost talked a little bit about that, and kind of along with that, hard work of transforming legacy technology, that, you know, sunk costs are real, and investments in current ways of doing things can sometimes be significant. And so changing our mindset and focusing on or considering doing things a different way, definitely the sunk cost aspect can be a challenge there as well. And so all of those things that I just mentioned, right, some of those DevOps challenges that are we face in the finance industry, create the reality that because of those realities, and the list goes on, building organizational support for change can be challenging because people hear the idea of let's do something different, right? And they think through, well, you know, these things exist, these are challenges, these are hurdles or roadblocks we're going to have to attack or approach. And as a result, getting support for making those changes is sometimes not easy. And the list of those challenges goes on, right? But go back through that list. With those challenges stated and thinking about them, what if you could be more nimble and consistent and improve efficiency and stability? What if you didn't have to account for the, oh shoot, I forgot XYZ, right? It comes along with human error. Or what if you didn't have to go take 47 screenshots of a manual process because you had a delivery pipeline that consistently enforced quality, audit, and change standards? It takes time and effort to implement DevOps practices and DevOps tooling, but the value of adopting those DevOps practices overwhelmingly outweighs the costs and challenges. And so as you start to realize the potential that DevOps practices will have on your organization, organizational support, as you, again, think through the opposite reality of those things. If those items were things that automation made easier and more consistent, then the organizational support for those practices is going to grow. So with that in mind, here's a couple of best practices and tips for success for DevOps in the finance industry or in general. The first one, adopt a disruptive and fail fast mindset. I would encourage everyone, be eager to think outside of the box and try new things, but the balancing factor there is be willing to try something else if an idea fails, right? Having a fail fast mindset and trying things, but accepting that you know, every idea is not going to work out, and being able to iterate very quickly is a key success factor because it's going to allow you to be very nimble and find the solution that is going to work right for you. The next one is aiming for consistency. So slow is smooth and smooth is fast. You may have heard that term. It's attributed to the Navy SEALs. But the concept there, right? Start slow, be methodical. And if you can create consistency, then you can make that process quicker that you've made consistent and slow and methodical. And you can make it quicker and you can scale it. Next, I'm a huge proponent of embracing the power of the cloud. 3 specific reasons I've called out here are velocity, flexibility, and scalability. And as you think about your own tech stack and infrastructure, I think back, it used to be a significant effort to find existing tech resources, right? Or hopefully you never had to do this, but if you did have to provision more because there was no additional capacity available, that can be a discussion that takes months of planning, discussion, and implementation. And that's so slow. The cycle time there is so long and doesn't really allow you to iterate quickly. And then once you do decide, okay, I need more resources, I'm gonna provision those, and I go through that process. Those resources are now costing you money, whether you're using them right now or not, or whether you're using the entirety of that capacity or not. Cloud infrastructure enables our teams to build and destroy thousands of resources every hour, scale with ease when we need more capacity, but also only pay for what we're using right now, right? So the ability to scale down during off hours for resources that are a lot less utilized whenever developers go home for the day, et cetera. That flexibility and that scalability is key. Another one that's near and dear to my heart, and I live it every day, is the goal and the best practice of centralizing DevOps and delivery tooling. Centralizing tooling, right, and removing the need for each of our teams to develop or manage our own tooling, or their own tooling rather, creates a lot of efficiency gains, right? And you're reducing siloed duplicate efforts. If you have every team providing their own source code management, build tooling, code quality tooling, et cetera, you have a ton of rework and duplicate effort going on across the enterprise because everyone's having to provide that tooling for themselves. And then you can also think about the layer on top of that DevOps tooling, right? Not just the functionality that you're getting through that tooling, but also the organization-specific functionality, pipelines, those kinds of things that are kind of the layer on top of the tooling. Centralizing that functionality allows you to significantly reduce duplicate efforts and also results in more reuse and collaboration across your towers and across your organization. Some of the enterprise functionality that CloudBees provides through CloudBees Core, like granular RBAC and CloudBees support, helps us to be able to provide tooling for our entire enterprise. The next one there, architect for scale and growth, and the concept of beginning with the end in mind. So if you're not familiar with that term, begin with the end in mind, it's from Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Begin with the end in mind, think things through. Where is this thing going? To put another way, I really like to say there's nothing more permanent than a temporary solution. I see that so many times where something is started with the idea that the scale is going to be fixed, or the use case of that tooling is going to be not something that's broadly adopted. And so as the dependency on that thing or system or functionality grows, you can run into constraints either from a scalability perspective or from an underlying architecture perspective, because that thing is implemented in a way that wasn't started from the beginning of how is this thing going to scale. So I would encourage you, especially if you have the perspective of being early in your technology transformation and DevOps journey, architect for scale. Think about how things are going to grow, and so that from the outset of that work, you can make sure that your tooling and your processes are well poised to grow as your journey progresses. Next, setting a high bar with emphasis on quality is really key. And these last two really go hand in hand, because you're not just setting a high bar, but you also are then taking that bar and those standards and quality gates that you set, and you're automating the validation of those controls and those quality gates, so that, again, you're reducing human error, you're making things really easy from an audit and governance and compliance evidence perspective. So those two really go hand in hand. On the set a high bar and emphasis on quality, I would encourage you to think through what are the processes that we're doing currently manually, right? Whether it's code review, whether we have some kind of checklist for changes that we make in our environment, whether we have different types of performance testing, integration testing, so on and so forth. All of the different things that you're currently doing, maybe in a non-automated fashion, think through what those things are and define a bar. What would the high quality sort of greenfield expectation be if we wanted to create a automated set of validations for those key measurements that you're wanting to ensure your delivery, your delivered software, your delivered product meets, and then set that bar, and from the perspective of having defined the goal of quality that you're going to work towards, work backwards from there to automate each of those quality gates and controls, so that from day one, anyone who's adopting this reusable tooling and functionality will be able to benefit from and have to not still think about, because they're aware of those controls and quality gates, but they're not having to worry about how they're going to implement them, because you already have an automated, consistent process for those types of validations. Another thing there that I really like the idea of with automating your quality gates and controls, my colleague Jennifer Hansen, who spoke during the CloudBees Connect panel a couple of weeks ago, said, "We want to delight our regulators." And I really like that quote, right? Thinking through not just how do I get this done, or how do I make sure that I'm checking these boxes, but how do we actually make things easier for our regulators, our auditors, our partners internally that focus on regulation and auditing, and think through things like, for example, as you're moving from a manual process for these different controls and validations towards an automated one, you're going to have to rethink how those things work. For example, right? Currently, if you have a manual change process where person A is an implementer, person B is a validator, so on and so forth, in a new world where automation is delivering the changes that you're making to source code all the way through your environment to production, and there's no human implementer, you have to shift left or kind of shift upstream those different parts of your processes. And so I would highly encourage you to rethink through how those things work, what those controls and requirements are that you have, and think through how do we re-implement these in a way that not just meets what we can currently do through having a human do things manually, but how do we actually make it better and more consistent through automation? Because the consistency aspect of automation is a huge win for governance. So I just covered a lot of information and a lot of context, and it maybe is a little bit overwhelming, but the beauty of a DevOps mindset, right? It's my job, right? There's not some separate team for ops, some separate team for dev. The whole idea there is it's my job. At Capital One, we have this concept of you build it, you own it, or YBYO, that we apply to how our teams not just deliver software, but then how they support and maintain and are accountable for that software. And you can apply the same concept to your organization and your role in your organization. Start somewhere, right? If I can imbue you with one goal, start somewhere. Take whatever you heard today from my presentation or these other presentations that resonated and you felt like would add value to your organization, and start there and make it better. And then just do that again and again, right? The same way we deliver software. Take that one identifiable thing you can improve, make it better, and do it again and again, just like you deliver any value. So if I can, like I said, imbue you with one goal, start somewhere. And going back to the list of challenges we talked about, if you're able to do that and tackle one of those challenges, right, and do that again and again, people are going to start to notice that you're making things better, and the value that DevOps practices and technology transformation can bring to your organization will start to be evident. And the cultural change and the organizational support for continuing those changes, the merry-go-round example that I gave, and the inertia that starts to build, will happen, and you will start to get momentum behind those changes and be able to continue down that DevOps journey and that transformation. So switching gears a little bit, now that we talked kind of high level, I wanted to share some thoughts on the challenge of the new remote normal we're working in, because all of those things that everyone just talked about and all of those challenges we just talked about are still very much the case, but we're also operating in a completely new environment and getting things done in new ways. And I think that that's something that's worth having a quick discussion about. So like I said, we're all trying to meet commitments and deadlines, but we're also in a new environment, right? And we're engaging our work through less familiar approaches. I reckon it to the act, or at least the attempted act of trying to change a flat tire while you're going 70 miles an hour down the interstate, right? Because we're trying to make sure that the commitments we've made still are met, but also orienting to this new way of doing things. So first challenge there, right? How do we do what we're doing and continue going about our goals while in this new environment? The second one is, for better or for worse, our dependence on technology has grown even further. We're spending all of our time communicating and using our technology platforms and ecosystems. And normally my team will attest to this. I live with a whiteboard marker glued to my hand, and I haven't touched a whiteboard marker in almost 5 months at this point, right? So, by the way, I publicly apologize to anyone who's had to watch me virtual whiteboard on Zoom. But like I said, our use of and our dependence on our technology that we currently have or don't have has in many ways been a proving ground for that technology that we're using. So we're all reckoning right now with what technology do I have available and how do we use it effectively, because nearly 100% of what we're doing is through these different technology tools. Another point that I'll make there on that kind of proving ground of our tech transformation, while dealing with this whole scenario and adapting as we've moved to a remote environment definitely hasn't been easy, because of the DevOps and tech transformation journey that we've undertaken at Capital One. I feel that my teams have been really able to be nimble during those times in a way that we wouldn't have been if we didn't have good DevOps practices and culture. So I think that's a really key thing to keep in mind. And then additionally there, right, the line between work and home can be difficult to find. And for most of us these days, right, that's the same place. I've joked that the line between work and home can tend to look a lot like a chart of the market these days, definitely not linear or predictable. So with those challenges said, let's talk a little bit about some tips for success that I found as we and my team has found as we've navigated through this new environment that hopefully will help you to continue to be able to operate effectively and deliver on your goals. The first one is accept the fact that things aren't normal, right? Back to the idea I mentioned of existential flex. We want to bend rather than break. So just accept the fact that things aren't normal. We're in a new environment, and give people grace as you're interacting because we're all in an unfamiliar environment. The second one is empathize often. Everyone has a different scenario, and leading with empathy is a great starting point. You know, something as simple as saying hello to the random kid who wanders into your next Zoom meeting, right? We've all probably been there over the past couple of months. And I think acknowledging the humanity of everyone we're working with and the fact that we're all finding that balance between work and home and empathizing with those scenarios is a great tip. The next one is make time for water cooler discussions, right? Your team culture dwells in the banter between meetings, the coffee runs that you take, et cetera. And so making time to stay connected as humans is key. My team has a practice we've done actually before we moved into this remote environment, but has especially proved valuable during this time of core hours. So 2 days a week, we take time and we have some time blocked off to spend an hour talking about whatever topics the team wants to chat through. Maybe it's something that we're working on and the information around that we want to share with the team. But a lot of times part of that discussion is just, what did you do over the weekend? What exciting things non-work related are going on in everyone's lives? Because staying connected to what everyone has going on is really key to creating an environment of psychological safety. And in that environment where people feel connected and integrated, they're going to continue to deliver their best work, which is really important, especially in the environment that we're in. And then one additional thing, right? Uses the right tech at the right time to stay in touch. So this is going to look different for everyone in every scenario, but I at least encourage you to think through it. Maybe instead, you know, one of the big things we've had discussions about as we've navigated this is meetings have, even more so than normal, grown to be nearly constant. And maybe you can keep your calendar and everyone else's calendar a little bit more free. Rather than scheduling a half an hour, an hour to talk through something, just reach out to somebody via chat and set up a quick 5-minute video call. Keep it short rather than scheduling a formal meeting, right? And then everybody can have more time to get things done in between the other meetings that they have on their calendar. Know when, or at least think through when, what makes sense for Slack or whatever chat tooling that you're using, and know when to jump from that to, hey, let's have a quick phone call, or better yet, turn your camera on and show that you're focusing on that conversation that you're having with that person. Again, staying connected. My team has set a team norm of joining videos, joining any call, any meeting that we're on by video whenever we can. And it's really allowed us to be able to keep feeling connected and communicate successfully. And then on the right time note there, right? Try to respect people's unique schedules and needs, going back to the empathy point. Avoid lunch and after hours meetings whenever possible. And just do your best in this environment that we're all in. I've challenged myself to make sure I'm thinking about how do I help people maintain as much of that work-life balance as we can. So I hope you find these thoughts and tips, both on DevOps in general and on working in this new remote normal, helpful. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A function of the Zoom chat, and I would love to try to answer those, or I think they'll be incorporated into the panel discussion that we have later on.
Fantastic. Chafin, thank you so much. The chat, you're going to go back now when you're done speaking. You're going to go back to the chat log and you're going to see all these people just lighting up with the different things that you said. Delighting the regulators. There's nothing more permanent than a temporary solution. I mean, there's some gems in there. A lot of really good learnings. Thank you very much for sharing.
Absolutely.
We have another polling question now that we'd like to put to the community. We appreciate everybody staying. Faye also did put a note out saying we are running a little long. There is too much awesome content here. So we're going to try and keep rolling. If you're able to keep joining us, we would encourage you to do so. The polling question, and we'll ask this question quickly and then we'll move on to Keith. Which of these best practices does your company use? Check all that apply, right? Based on a lot of the stuff that Chafin was just talking about. So let us know what you're doing in your environment. And while you're doing that, I am going to hand it off to Keith Blizzard from Fidelity, who's going to run us through his presentation on how ALM enables Fidelity's journey to the cloud. So Keith, welcome.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Just a quick time. How much time do you want to spend on this, just so I can update my presentation as needed?
I would plan on doing your presentation as you prepared it.
Okay. Well, hopefully you guys will stay with me and so forth. Super excited to be here. My name's Keith Blizzard. I'm the SVP for Public Cloud Services at Fidelity Investments. I'm super excited to share with you a few different items. Like Sasha mentioned, we're going to talk a little about DevOps and what is our definition and how we're looking to enable it. Follow up a little bit with Chafin with some of his components as enterprise capabilities and how we do that, all within the context of kind of what does it mean from a value perspective? Why would we be here talking about this? So with that, I'm going to jump ahead. So disclaimer, normal stuff. This is a case study of our view, not endorsements for any way, shape, or form, all that normal legal jargon. So about me. So I'm 20 years plus in this industry. I've been doing cloud transformations and digital transformation the last 10 years. So my focus for the last decade's been on public cloud, enabling capabilities and services and solutions at scale. I've done this between Microsoft, Johnson & Johnson, which I was, and I built out the practice there. And then just over the last year, I've been doing it here at Fidelity. So I've been just here since last June, really building things out. And I focus on a few different areas. Cloud platforms, building them out. Building out our ALM and DevOps capabilities and solutions. We'll spend a lot of time talking about that today. And as well as talk about cloud ops. So how does this work when you actually have all these different CSPs and where it fits in? So with that in mind, let's talk a little about Fidelity. So, Fidelity's been here for a while. And technology's been such a core component of the history. And you look at some of these pictures, I was thinking about this. There's probably people on the call when you look at, that picture on the left with the computers. That's what a computer used to look like, in the 90s. And, shockingly, you look at it, that's not a touch screen. So when she's touching the monitor, that's actually not a touch screen there. But having someone with dual monitors back in the day, that was rare. Many people didn't have that. But, if you look at Fidelity's always been pushing the envelope with respect to technology. And for the last few years, it's been that pivot, the pivot that, many of the speakers today talked about, the transition into the multi-public cloud strategy. And so we officially kicked off this transformation program last year. One of the reasons why I'm here and joined the company was to help be a part of that and actually drive a once-in-a-generation transformation from a company with such an amazing legacy that Fidelity has. We have heavy commitments whenever you have a transformation. It's not just about the cool stuff and the technology, but, moving applications, refactoring, all the different benefits we're looking to get from a cloud perspective. And so over the next few years, you'll see a lot of that being the key focus for us. So what's our vision? So why? Why are we doing this? And what are our objectives, from a cloud perspective? And then we'll talk about how the tooling is so important to this. our vision is how do we accelerate the delivery of new capabilities and really tap into that innovation that we're getting from the tens of thousands of engineers from our cloud providers, and what do we do with that? And how do we make sure we leverage that to its most extensible way to deliver the value back to many of you, our customers, and for the benefit of Fidelity itself. If you look at the challenges companies has as they look at cloud, some people just think of it as VMs and storage and compute, and it's beyond that. It's how do we are able to create value from that innovation. I'm so jealous of all these new college hires that we add in every year, and you see what they have available at their fingertips about leveraging their innovation, their idea now with no constraints with respect to capacity or capabilities that when I started my career in the late 90s, I had challenges with respect to getting infrastructure. I had challenges with respect to making sure we had capacity to do the things we do. Those things are now abstracted to us. And so with that, there's new responsibilities that get established, through our overall journey, whether it's making sure that those components are done in a common way, that we maximize the value, right? We've all heard the horror stories where people leave components and applications up over the weekends when not needed, and it drives the bill up. So, making sure that we have, the tooling, the automation around FinOps and driving that as an accountability across is critical. Security and compliance. There's nothing that you see more in the news about how do you make sure from a capability perspective that we drive that automation and security. And we'll spend a good amount of time talking about that through different lenses in order to achieve that result, all based off of automation. I think Chafin, though, mentioned one thing that was really important that probably many people don't think about, and that's the training and the culture aspects of it. So as we talk through today, we'd love to, hopefully foster some ideas on your end on how do you look at making this transformation journey from a culture perspective and different ways to do that from a training and change management perspective. So all easy things. I'm sure many of you have similar challenges with respect to this, so I'm going to spend a couple minutes going through from a culture perspective first, and then we'll go through the tech aspects of it. So DevOps, you've heard this throughout the last couple of presentations. The flavor that I would do beyond the infinite scale that Chafin talked about at Cap One, same thing Fidelity. We got 14,000 developers around the world with high expectations that things are always running. We had $1.2 billion gets in our artifact management solution, last month, right? So like the scale we're talking about here is just immense, right? With respect to what we're held accountable for. But what I would say though is think about your journey. The journey isn't going to be the same for each team. And I like to make sure beyond the resiliency and capability of the scale is how can you be flexible based off of each of those individual teams are on their DevOps journey, right? You're going to have people, and especially large enterprises, where not everybody is at the same point. And that's the visual here in the green rows, is you're going to have some teams that are going to be okay right now just be on agile development, and that's okay. And then you have other teams doing the full gamut from a DevOps perspective. So how, as you look at building out your solution, your patterns, you can be prepared to handle all these different types of scenarios at scale and help them continue to mature over time, right? So it's got to be something that we make sure we're cognizant of, we make conscious decisions, and we have the flexibility in our technology with respect to, many of us with the open source tools and why we're here, to make sure we build that in as an approach and so forth. And we're careful of understanding, acknowledge there will be these anti-patterns, that come up across the environments, but how do we make sure that we continue to help them grow in order to achieve what we want them to do? right? Which is the continuous deployment and the overall DevOps strategy itself. Sounds easy, sounds super easy, but it's hard as heck. So I love this slide. So I have 2 slides from Gartner, the only 2 I stole, and I apologize to my Forrester panelists here today. I love the way that they articulated how do they look at self-service cloud automation, right? Because it goes into a lot of the different things that we have to think about from a tooling and from a capability perspective. So you see two kind of categories, right? You have provisioning automation and on the left with the red, right? The red box. And then I highlighted in green the access enablement. And this has to be a conscious decision that companies and enterprises need to make on their journey into the cloud itself. So if you look at the red, this is where I usually say companies that just take the existing team that was currently doing infrastructure and capabilities and they just point it now to the cloud. So, well, instead of running this or doing your onboarding templates, or for some of us who've been doing this a while, the lead time that it took to provision, compute, and so forth was really, really long. Well, now instead of actually being really long, I can just rent it, but I'm looking at individual resources or pre-approved templates. In this case here, your core team can and will become a bottleneck. It'll be a bottleneck because you're the ones who are actually managing how and where and what people are actually leveraging across your stack. So where I like to recommend people is to the right, the access enablement side. So if you look at what we're trying to do is push innovation as much as possible to the edge. Enable the things from security, compliance, financial, all the things I had on the previous slide. But I don't want to be a blocker. I don't want to be in the middle, right? I want to be able to empower the users and these DevOps teams themselves to get at that innovation of what the cloud providers are enabling, right? So if you look at that as a core principle and you look at that from a self-service management, there's a few different things that I would ask you to think about, right? And so there's the enablement aspects and there's the control. All this is aligning with a complexity question you need to ask yourself, right? So I talk a lot about, the requirements. And so from an IT perspective, how many times we talk to our security group or anything from a compliance organization, it's all about control, right? And so we talked a lot about with Chafin talking about automation and APIs and the fact that regulators are able to actually, see this as a positive thing because there's more access and data and isolation that you could build into your platform to enable this blue, this light blue sections and so forth from controls and standardization. But it takes time and effort for you to think about, right? Where the innovation comes in is as you go up the stack. So you look at the enablement side. So how do I accommodate the flexibility and really drive that out across the access of all the different development teams that exist across your enterprise, right? And having the autonomy where you're not just looking at the judge or the jury to justify or change some of these components, but really allow that innovation to have at the edge. One thing for everyone to think about though, is as you look at these different components, from an IT perspective, one of the challenges we have to think about is how do we make sure that it's simple for people? The cloud in general, especially for someone like us that we're doing multi-public cloud, the complexity is really, really high. Right? So if I had to look at all the different configurations and services and all the different innovation I could pull from multi-public clouds, there's very few people who's done this at scale across multiple CSP providers. So what are the different ways that we, as a DevOps culture, can build out mechanisms to make it easier and reduce that complexity? So that is really the problem statement that we have as we look at our ALM journey. So what does it mean for us? So what, from a Fidelity perspective, am I held accountable for with respect to ALM and the DevOps journey for our developers? So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking through that. So our goals. right, is all tapped around that user experience with common capabilities that surround it, right? I do build out those different menu items for those 14,000 developers to tap into. And I have to make a conscious decision, or what are the ones I require versus what are the ones that I want to provide option, selection, and choice. And with that, when I build out a capability or service offering, my job or my challenge is, how do I make it where it's appealing for people, where people actually want to leverage those services versus the mandate approach sometimes we do across IT itself. And so by focusing on the end user experience and really enabling the developer first to go fast with all the different things required from a regulated industry, you became a pull. People want to leverage you. People want to leverage these capabilities. And it's more than just, me providing it to them, it's us doing it together. And we're able to do this from a focus and scale to be able to really drive the efficiency, the capabilities, but also allow developers to get onboarded fast. More and more, as I'm able to leverage these principles, I'm able to actually just accelerate the time to value in what we're actually doing from an IT perspective. So I always like to give a little bit, I'm a techie. I've been doing this for a long time. I love talking about technology and cloud. And so here's my reference architecture approach that, for people to think about. If you look on the bottom, these are your CSPs. These are your providers. And as many of you know, from a Fidelity perspective, we are leaning into Kubernetes at both the PaaS from an Amazon and Azure, as well as on-premise with respect to different technology there. That's our core, right? Many of us are going down the same path. We are there with it. We are heavily focused that as our compute engine across the overall enterprise itself. But as you look at the other components that are there and what we need to look at from the right with the insights, we're going to spend a little time today talking about metrics. What does it mean for metrics? And how am I going to challenge my team and even propose all of you to challenge your view on what metrics that actually matter? And what does it really mean from an overall approach perspective? And then you look at the governance and security components and how do you embed that in order to be able to really have that level playing field of consistent, available approach to be able to drive the level of governance and security, all focused with the overall end user experience. And then how do you make it simple for people to onboard, right? So here's kind of the reference architecture, but let's go through the principles, right? So what are the things that we look at, from our guiding approach as we look at new capabilities and onboarding capabilities and technologies and so forth, and you see some of these, and these are similar to what was already discussed today. So I'm not going to go through all of them, but, I would ask you to think about what are the ones that you want to drive? Like, what are the things and so forth that you want to hold as your key components with respect to this? One I love talking about is pace over perfection, right? In IT, I've been doing this a while. You have no idea how many meetings that come in and in the beginning, setting the tone of like, okay, what are we trying to achieve here? Like, there's always a reason why not to do something, right? But I think leaders now, from a DevOps and an agile culture perspective, is let's get something out there, let's learn from it, and then continue to improve over time, right? With the end goal of driving some of these principles, but let's make sure we start, right? It's so hard to take that first step, to go over that first hurdle, and then we'll build out more and more things over time, right? So self-service, full automation, everything is code. These are things, as you look across your teams, things that I would ask you to really embed as a culture. And we'll spend a couple minutes talking about that near the end of challenges to think about. But think of yours, right? Think of your principles and really look for ways to build that as just part of our overall approach for you and your team. So self-service, I mentioned this, I'm going to continue to say this all the time. 14,000 developers, I cannot manage this size and scale through tickets. Right? It's just not fun, right? I don't know about you, I've done enough operational roles in my career to realize that's not fun, just going through tickets and tickets and tickets. We want to really drive this win-win approach. right? So providing the access what a developer needs to get going within an hour, like that's the goal, right? How do we make it just so simple that a new person comes in, joins Fidelity, they're super excited. I'm joining one of the best companies in the world, a fintech that's a leader in this industry. And I want them to be happy about their journey, that they joined us and they can become useful really, really fast and enable this across the stack and then embed this as the capability to go directly into the cloud, right? That's a key one. All within flexibility, whether they want to leverage UI, whether they want to use an API, CLI, you know, I need to give that flexibility. I don't want to be so prescriptive that they have to go one way, right? And that's key, that's key. But then the benefits to me. So like, hey, I don't want to be a ticket puncher. I don't want us just to look at that as our value, right? I want to drive more the higher end work. So by me enabling this and pushing the accountability to the edge, you know, my job is to then drive what is the envisioning of the future, right? And drive some of the common components through things such as the audit and capabilities that I can actually do at the edge and really just make it as just part of our norm. It shouldn't be a large undertaking when people ask these different components and so forth. So that's kind of my challenge that I look at, and I really drive, you know, not just ourselves, but the team to really look at ways to be able to enable this as a win-win from a self-service perspective. Security, DevSecOps, like I'm sure everybody, you know, you've talked about this, you've heard this term, you embed this in your approach. And, you know, I could actually just have a 30-minute presentation just on this, but I won't. I promise you I won't. I'm just going to go through a couple key terms or key approaches for you to think about, especially as you look at the whole ecosystem from the ALM through the cloud itself. So if you look at ways that we address this, and we have part of our core strategy is how do we enable defensive, preventative, and detective controls all across that ecosystem, right? And they can't, or let me rephrase this, they aren't going to be the same, especially as you go across tools and definitely as you go across CSPs. So if you look at the benefits and the capabilities that exist for AWS versus the capabilities that exist in the Azure stack, they're different. The intent should always be the same. How you implement them and then trace them back into your tooling will be different. And you have to be comfortable and flexible with that. And my challenge to all of you is make sure you leverage the benefits of one versus the other. So if we look at things on the Microsoft side with Azure Advisor or Azure Policy or Azure Blueprints, how is that portraying to things such exist on the Amazon side with IAM and Service Catalog, and making sure that you have the bridge to give people flexible as they go one CSP versus the other, and really build that as part of your approach. But all along, you want to kind of move as much as possible to the front, right? All through preventative and defensive controls in the front. The detective controls should be there just as not only the last resort, but a way to look across the environment over time to manage drift, right? So as you build your tooling and your capabilities, you know, make sure that you have this embedded as early on in the development process as possible. Because there's nothing worse than when someone's trying to go live in production and they get an issue or a change that occurs that prevents people from hitting that last line, right? Like we've all been there, at least I have in my career, and you gotta make sure you build that in from the beginning and so forth. That's what's gonna drive a positive experience for your development teams and really drive a better security approach than where some other people have in the past. Metrics. So I'm a metrics guy. So my team loves me because I only look at metrics, and they try to make a statement and it's like, okay, well, show me the data. It's all about the data. And there's amazing capabilities that are available and how you want to expose it. And it could be a value add experience for people to really look at it from a BU perspective, business unit, and how do they are able to see the value of what's there, right? So the challenge though that I would ask you all to think about though, if you look at a lot of common enterprise IT teams, they look at the sum across the whole stack. Like, okay, well, the platform was up. So we must be good. We 100% resiliency. Okay. Well, the average latency was this. So we must be good. Oh, okay. My challenge is, how do you get that down to individual team experiences? Because at the end of it, if we're providing this common solution, our value is going to be based off of the business value these individual teams are actually driving. And so looking at the metrics on their eyes, not yours, having the 99.9% resiliency, but if you're the one team that was down at that 0.001, you don't feel good, right? So changing the lens of what you care about and making sure that you think and drive the team culture to put your view away from kind of these IT only platform. What does it mean for the individual teams? And make sure that you drive that across your environment. That is a big cultural change that I know a lot of teams, and that's something we pushed significantly, in my career over the last few years. So challenges. So I have a couple minutes left, so I'm gonna just kind of end with some of these things. Lessons learned, inputs for your journey forward, right? The technology aspects, I kind of mentioned this a few times, but I wanna make sure that you all have this as one of the things that you leave with. Flexible, resilient, enterprise-wide, right? And be open to change. That's said a couple times today. Like this pace that we're talking about from a DevOps, from an ALM, from a cloud are changing so quickly. You need to make sure that you have solutions that could tap into many different areas and be able to be open to that change. Be open to connections over and be flexible and decoupled across something that is standard with respect to the environment. Team culture. Everything I'm saying here, majority of it is based off of people and strategy and helping people get there. So if you look at, let's say you started a team today and you're building out a new strategy, you define what that true north is. Like, we are going here, we are getting to this point. Leaders need to help build out the path to get there and be very flexible as you go, right? It's never gonna be, I've never seen a complete straight line from here to here that things will go according to plan. Having the flexibility to be able to go as long as you're going towards that point and helping reinforce it over time. And my challenge to all of you as leaders is make sure you manage the whip, right? Within teams and so forth, sometimes we give them too much. We got to manage what they can do on a per sprint, per month, per quarter basis, all aligning to get to that vision. And so with that, I'd really implore you to think about that and manage that to the best of your abilities. Last is communications. IT communications is one of the funniest things I've ever seen in any company I ever worked with, for, around. It takes many, many times to repeat the same idea, the strategy, the approach, and do it in different channels, do it in different ways. As we discussed, the new normal here, everyone working remotely, the need for communications and do it differently is critical for us, because it's something that is now harder for people, especially new people joining your team, and how you want to make sure that they feel part of it. It's really hard to not just, tell people what to do, but how do you make sure that they feel and they embrace it and they feel a part of it? And that can only be done through repeatable communications, different channels, different formats, different themes. So if you think you're over communicating, I could probably tell you you're not. And so that'd be an area that I'd ask you to think about as you go down this journey, because it is one of the most fun experiences that I've been a part of. And I really hope that you found some of this information really valuable as you look at your journey and how this all fits into that broader strategy itself. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for the time. I wish you all nothing but safe and wellness in this crazy time we're in. And I'll hand it over to Sam again.
Lovely, lovely. Well, this morning at 5 o'clock my time, it was very dark outside this window. And I said, I'll know that this was a successful event as it gets lighter and lighter outside. And it keeps getting lighter and lighter. I keep getting more and more informed. Keith, that was a fantastic presentation. Thank you for sharing that with us. I loved the idea about moving from the technology value in the metrics to more of the business value, trying to get alignment about that. I think that's really great. We do have another polling question, and we are running long. So I'm going to ask the polling question to come up. And while the polling question is coming up, I'm going to ask our panelists to also join me on camera. Lovely. All right. So the polling question, is the polling question up? I don't see it. Let's see if that's coming up. The polling question are based on the thing that you were just talking about, the different metrics. What are you tracking, audience members? What are you folks tracking when it comes to the metrics around DevOps? Lead time, deployment frequency, click all that apply, and we'll take a look at the answers here in just a second. While you're voting, I'd like to introduce a few folks that we have not yet had on screen. Of course, you know Yost and Chapin and Keith, you know me, but you don't know Geeta. So Geeta, can you introduce yourself, please?
Hello, everyone. I know we have audiences across the globe, so greetings. Hope everybody's safe and doing well. I am Geeta Kagati, Senior Director of Software Engineering at TransUnion. In this role, I'm currently focused on supporting the US market's data acquisition and digital marketing platforms. I really love what this team does and supports. We process large-scale data ingestions from tens of thousands of providers and transform the raw data into insightful information. And these are the drivers for TransUnion's products and solutions delivery.
Lovely. Thank you, Geeta. Wonderful to have you here. And last but not least, Anders. Can you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Anders Wahlgren. I'm a VP of Technology Strategy at CloudBees. I joined CloudBees about a year ago, came on as part of the Electric Cloud acquisition, where at Electric Cloud, I was the Chief Technology Officer for many, many years. And I work with some of our largest customers, a lot of them in the finance industry, in choosing and implementing our tools and our platforms. And I've been doing that for a number of years, and I enjoy it greatly. It's a fun and an interesting challenge.
Yeah, the DevOps space is the greatest space in the world. There's so many different fantastic conversations to be had. All right, so speaking of fantastic conversations, let's roll into our panel discussion. So there are a few questions for us to pose to people. I guess we're going to wait for the polling questions to sort of finish up. And then I'm going to find these polling questions. All right. There it is. So the first question that we have for the panels, and some folks talked about it already, and also if you're in the audience, I'm speaking to you as well. But the first question here for everyone is, how has the need for remote work impacted your day-to-day operations? So how has it changed your outlook for future transformation? How has it changed your relationship with your customers? You can take it sort of any way you want to take it. But how has the need for this remote work impacted your day-to-day operations? And so I'm going to start, Geeta, I'm going to start with you, because you have not yet had a chance to speak yet, and I'd love to hear what you think.
Okay. How has this COVID scenario impacted our day-to-day operations? I think TransUnion, we are a global company with offices around 30 countries. So we do have a good infrastructure in place for remote working, and we leverage it very well, even outside of these times. And when we ripped the bandage in mid-March, I was really impressed to see how our technology teams kind of just thrived well and adapted to this change very fast. We've also demonstrated that we move faster, and we've been acting in more agile ways than we have thought. So I think that was pretty impressive, just knowing that we were able to scale all our end user equipment and collaborating tools across the different regions and locations, even within the US.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Go ahead, keep going. If you have more to say, I didn't mean to interrupt.
I was just going to say, like, in terms of how has it changed my outlook for the future transformation, it is an interesting question. And being in this times, none of us have a playbook that we have that we can just go back and look through. Maybe that we create one going forward, but it is an interesting question. You step back and think about all the things that we have taken for granted, and we just assume those some things are the norm and the best ways to work. I mean, at least for us, some of us, we think we have a bias towards, like, if I meet a person in a room, I can build my relationships better. I can have a better productivity in collaboration. But over the 4 months, we have seen that this has really taken a different turn. We are able to collaborate over our technology, remote tools. We have been able to build new relationships. In our company, we've had a lot of leadership roles that have been onboarded during this time, and we had to start working with them, knowing them, and we've been able to do all of that remotely. So, but again, we got to kind of wait and see how the office space is going to turn out to be as we move away from, as we head towards the future. Definitely, innovation is kind of scaling up at a very fast pace. Maybe we'll start looking at finding simpler, faster, and even lesser ways of lesser expensive ways of operating.
Yeah, absolutely. I think constraint and necessity is the mother of invention. Having constraints, I think, is a really healthy thing. And if you think about the consumer experience here, the amount of transition and transformation that had to occur for banks to be able to continue to function the way they did, thank goodness that we've all got the deposit by phone thing. That's technology that allows us to not have to go in. We've all got the, Apple Pay and Google Pay and all these different ways of doing cashless payments. There's so much of the infrastructure that we are leveraging today, the foundations of what we're able to build off of have been put in place by your industry over years. But I do believe that there's going to be a lot more innovation in a pretty compressed time frame based on the complete change in public behavior, for lack of a better way of putting it. So that's great, Geetha. Thank you very much. So Keith, I saw you nodding your head a little bit there. So what are your thoughts? I know you touched on this in your presentation a little bit, but what are your thoughts here?
I think it changed my time on when I work, right? So my days now start earlier, as many of us, because of those connections. I find it amazing for people joining during this. It's hard enough joining a large company, but doing this at a time we're completely remote, where you can't make those connections. So it really requires us as leaders to actually be more available, to be more time zone sensitive. I wish I could tell you my hours have gone down. My hours have actually increased both in the morning and as well as the evening to cover this. I think in general, the level of output has been great, and then people have leaned in and all those things. I think the thing that worries me is making sure that burnout doesn't come. We're now at 4 months in this journey. You're starting to see people really not taking a break and needing to disconnect. And lucky me, I'm taking a break next week. So, I have to practice what I preach and make sure that the people disconnect. So I would ask you to make sure you all watch out for each other. We're all going to have bad days on this, and make sure that we come in with our eyes open and we help each other on a peer-to-peer perspective.
Human, very human. Love it. Thank you. We're all in it together for sure. It's us against the virus. So, Chafin, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I know I touched on this a little bit in my presentation. I would say my thought process went 2 directions on the question here. So the first is, regarding the impact of this. I think the potential for impact has been potentially total, right? Like, it's changed almost every aspect of what we do. But it's been really awesome to see that the actual impact to us achieving our goals, keeping the lights on, if you will, all of that has been awesome to watch. My teams and the organization adapt really smoothly. I think our technology investments have put us in a place for that flex that we needed to make to be doable. So kind of overall, that's one thought on the, that's not at all to say there's not an impact, right? The impact is like Keith even mentioned is kind of on a day-to-day basis. How we're doing what we're doing is a lot different. Our hours, our methods of communication and getting our work done, all those things are new and less familiar. But I think that, again, the perseverance of awesome people, I'll give everybody in the organization a shout out there to make all those things happen. And then the technology investments and nimble trait that comes along with that has made it successful.
Wonderful. And I love the idea of having those blocks of time that you mentioned where people can just join and talk about whatever, it's the hallway track, right? It's my favorite part of any conference is just bumping into people in the hallway. And so finding a way to recreate that, there's going to be some technical innovation, I'm sure, that's going to allow that to happen again in a more virtual environment. So I'm going to go to Anders and ask this question. And then Joost, I'm going to go to you last. I'm going to give you a subtly different question since you're not necessarily a practitioner. But Anders, you work for a software company. How is this impacting us?
It's interesting because, for CloudBees, we're fortunate in many ways because we're already a very virtual organization. We're spread all over the place. And a lot of us, even before COVID-19, work out of our home offices. The vast majority of people that I work with on a daily basis work out of their home offices. So from that perspective, there wasn't a difficult transition to, oh my gosh, I'm at home, I don't have a webcam, I can't find a webcam anywhere, which happened to my sister. Those sorts of things. We're fairly well set up to collaborate remotely already. I think in terms of what's the situation for customers. One of the things that this really hammers home, if we haven't beaten this horse to death already, is the importance of automation and orchestration, and the importance of not having humans having to be in a particular location in a particular time as kind of a critical path element of getting the work done. And you can tell, when I work with some companies, not customer of ours, but vendors of mine, if you will, I have to call support for this product or that product or those sorts of things. You notice the ones that are well set up to handle this. And you notice the ones that have just, shoveled off, for example, their entire support function to some third party that now all they really are is an answering service and we'll get back to you later. So you really see the difference in organizations that were already set up to do this from a technical and tooling perspective. But I think, as far as CloudBees is concerned, it's obviously a difficult situation for everyone. And all of a sudden, if you have children, they're not in school, so they're here. So now you're being a parent and a worker at the same time. How do you separate those things, and how do you, not separate them too much, but just right, and all of those things. And so there's a lot of human challenges that you have even when the technology and the tooling and the infrastructure is in place. So for sure, it's been a challenging time, I think, for everyone, but also a time when you start to appreciate, the people that you work with and the systems that you've put in place and a culture that allows for a lot of flexibility in kind of how you get your job done as long as it gets done. So definitely it's been a challenge, but also, there's always a silver lining, I think. So I tend to look for those.
Life finds a way. I love it. All right, Joost, I have a slightly different question for you. Simply because you're talking with folks like the folks on the panel here all the time about what they're doing. And I'd be interested in hearing from you. Is this situation that we're in right now with COVID, is that accelerating or is that deaccelerating the pace of that transformation for the different organizations that you're speaking to?
Let me think where to start. I think in the first step, COVID is certainly something that creates some immediate issues, at least for some organizations. Those that are in a good position have similar experiences to those that we already learned about with the contributions of the panel members until now. Some others are certainly in, let's say, in a less sophisticated solution. I'm aware of banks that basically had to redesign their home working systems because they have never been designed for the full workforce. So they ran immediately into scalability issues and had to expand what they can deliver rapidly. And others are certainly in a position where these systems are too restrictive because they were meant for business travel, but not for working from home. So, and it's certainly an issue if you have a very, let's say, a PC, a laptop with a very limited set of capabilities where you can't install an additional piece of software that you need, where you can't print, et cetera, et cetera. So there are different things that also relate to corporate culture, I believe. But when it comes to the medium and longer term, when it comes to digital transformation as such, I certainly see, let's say, three different categories. One category is a group of companies, financial services companies that are, say, in a not too great financial shape for a variety of reasons, but maybe only because of COVID-19, maybe accelerated by COVID-19. So these companies are basically struggling to keep the lights on. Then we are seeing, say, a group of companies that are in a pretty good financial situation. They are definitely trying to drive their transformation programs as far as possible, considering that they may or may not be able to do everything from home, from the employees' homes that they used to do in their offices, but certainly a larger group here. And those who are not in a position to really fully execute the transformational plans are at least planning to restart the transformation as soon as possible. I never had so many discussions as banks, for example, about how to basically plan, restart transformation, about the right architecture approaches, about the cloud, how to move from on-prem into the cloud, et cetera, like during these weeks and months of COVID-19. So it's basically for them, continue transformation, or at least prepare to, let's say, accelerate when the others are still in a mode of reconsideration. And then we have a group in the middle, and this group of companies see some limitations when it comes to budgets. Because they have to shift priorities. They do not have, probably no one has, but I wanted to say unlimited, but they do not have the large resources of the companies in the second group. So they are basically reprioritizing in line with COVID-19 requirements, maybe more on the online aspect, maybe more on process automation, maybe more on automation. For them, it's kind of a reduction of speed, but they certainly see that they can't simply sit there and do nothing. They certainly see that they need to improve their landscapes to cope with the situation within the slightly more limited environment or resources they have available.
Fantastic. Yeah, the Gene Kim, who's a DevOps sort of thought leader, has got a great saying where he says, the improvement in the quality of the daily work is more important than the quality of the daily work. So it doesn't matter where you are today, as long as you're continuously improving, eventually you're going to win, right? So I think that's great. So I think what we're going to do now is I would love to show the polling question answers. I want to use that as some talking points for this group to sort of reflect on. So Max, if I could ask you to pull up the first polling question, and I believe that one is, what are the drivers? Yeah, what are your top business drivers? 57%, let's see, 64%, I didn't realize they weren't sorted. So I guess the big red one, that's the one that I should look at. Increase efficiency and productivity was one of the business drivers that people had. The UX, another top one, reduce time to market, time to value. So this lines up pretty well, Joost, with your findings. Does anyone have any comments on on these results? Anything surprising to folks?
Yeah, maybe one comment from my side. Obviously, we could talk about these data points for a couple of minutes, but I think most interestingly, the most interesting aspect is increased efficiency and productivity. And this is nicely in line with what I mentioned earlier, automation, stronger focus on digital operations during the crisis. And I think the red data bar reflects that very nicely, that experience is still very important, but there's a stronger need for automation to ensure that companies can work in spite of a very unusual situation for their workforce.
Fabulous. So all of you folks in the audience, congratulations, you're normal, right? You got the standard answers. That's very good. Let's take a look at the next one. And the question for us here was, which of these best practices does your company use? And centralized DevOps and delivery tooling, so the platform, sort of the platform team that folks have talked about. Thinking about having the end in mind, architecting for growth, right, Chafin? We got to do that. These are all, yeah, interesting. Any thoughts, anyone on this? Any of our panelists? Power of the cloud, obviously very important to people.
I think I'm fine with the centralized DevOps and delivery tooling, as long as the centralization is in service of self-service and not in service of just gatekeeping, because sometimes it can go one way or the other. And as we've heard from some of the speakers today, self-service is a big deal. It really is an enabler and a force multiplier.
And Chafin's, Geeta, go ahead.
Especially if you're globally scaled across, we got to kind of watch the centralized aspect of it. In our company, we are treading towards what we call as a inner sourcing model. That is more of having focus on common core patterns and having some processes and facilitation around that by a group called manager group, or that that has some overseeing of this common core patterns. And this gives the ability with the right facilities and processes around that for global geographies to kind of focus in on leveraging the build once, deploy many times aspect of it, but also have the ability to contribute anything that they need at their own pace versus waiting on one group to build it, and have the ability to share with other geographies. And also kind of focus on, I need something more specific for my geography. I'll use the common patterns, but I'm just going to build something more specific. So that kind of ability is what we are trying to tread towards.
Yeah, being flexible for sure. But treating that DevOps team in a DevOps manner, that's very meta, sort of another Chafinism, right? As having that DevOps team that is doing the DevOps stuff, but it's doing it for other people. I think that's really interesting as well. Joost, I think you had a comment. Actually,
one directly to this data set, and another one that is also kind of surprising, and I'm also refers to a question from the audience. I think what surprised me, although it's certainly that only one person said, hey, a fail fast mindset is important. And I'm certainly not an expert in failing fast, at least I hope so. What I'm seeing in companies is that if fail fast is not something that is at least under consideration, the culture tends to be a little bit more, say, failure avoiding, which means it's not so much about innovation. And this certainly aligns with some data we haven't talked about until now, which shows that a too large share of financial services is pretty reluctant when it comes to innovation. So I hope it's just some kind of coincidental survey result. And the other one is also coming from the audience. It's basically saying there's kind of surprise about how low the increase in market share is. And I think this might be, first of all, certainly some impact from the ongoing crisis. At the same point in time, it may also depend on the structure of the respondents. Because we saw earlier on this percentage, I think I talked about it, this percentage varied very strongly depending on the geography, on the region where the respondent is located.
Very interesting, right? You mentioned North America was not quite as concerned necessarily, bothered by the need for regulation, which is, yeah, that's just, I'm not going to make any editorial comments on that one. That's fine. Next panel, unless someone else has a comment on this, we'll go to the next polling question.
I'll just throw a 3-second comment in there to echo what Geeta and a couple of other people said. It's totally not about centralizing and becoming a bottleneck, right? It's about how do you centralize those contributions and innovation and make sure that there's not duplicate efforts going on. And balancing that without being right, and also implementing that control plane, right, that consistently for everyone, but also not being a bottleneck for sure.
Right. Yep. Awesome. Okay. Next polling question. And then what we'll do, I believe after this is because we are running long, I think after this polling question, we will say goodbye. So stick around for one more minute. I appreciate everybody's patience while we get through this. There is just way too much good stuff for us to talk through here, which is fantastic. So what metrics does your organization track? And we talked about this a lot in Keith's presentation. And so Keith, what are your thoughts on what people are tracking out there?
Yeah, I think all the metrics makes sense. Again, nothing that I'm looking at this list, other than we don't track anything. I'd love to talk to whoever that is. That'd be a fun conversation. But the message that I wanted the people to think about is how you track it. Like, as I mentioned, like don't think of it at the one number for everything. Like, this is specific to teams. So make sure from a pivot perspective, you take these amazing metrics, but then you make them specific for the people that are actually leveraging it and adding value. That'd be my humble recommendation.
Give them the telemetry to be able to optimize themselves. DevOps teams, improve thyself, kind of a deal.
Yeah, and even just make sure they realize or understand if you're doing a good job for them. So if you're the enterprise team, and you're hitting, you think, your target, but everyone else from a perception perspective isn't aligned with that, wouldn't that be good to know, right? Yeah. And so if you continue to impact one team and they hate you, like, it'd be good to know that, because there's data and then improvements and continuous improvement, like you mentioned with the Gene Kim comment, that you could kind of make as part of a story together.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it's.
Does anyone else have any other comments on the metrics, Anders? I see.
Yeah, just a quick one. I mean, I think with metrics, it's always important to think about what is the outcome that you're trying to achieve by looking for changes in this metric, whether you're trying to make it higher or lower, and so on. Because, metrics on their own can just be a complete waste of time, and they can be about vanity, and they can be about blaming and shaming and lots of other things. So I think with metrics, it's always really important to consider, what outcome are we trying to achieve? Is this something that we're actively trying to improve right now? And if not, should we even be caring about that metric? Maybe we should focus on a different one. With metrics, less is better. Throwing up 58 different metrics on a giant TV screen doesn't necessarily help anyone. Try to focus on the ones that you care about then in terms of improving, and then move on and rotate them over time. If you're always showing the same metrics all the time, you're probably not using them to force change or to enable and help change. So keep actively focused on what outcomes you're trying to achieve, which metrics serve those outcomes, and what you are doing to try to impact those metrics and thus the outcomes. If you don't have that sort of chain connected, then the metrics are really just pretty graphs most of the time, unfortunately.
Right. And Geeta, I'll get to you in just one second. The other thing is the famous Dilbert cartoon, which is, he says, we're going to give you money every time you close a bug or file a bug or whatever. And so the developer says, well, go code me a minivan, right? Because I can game that metric. So find metrics that aren't gameable also. Geeta.
Yeah, just to add on to what Anders was saying, right? Metrics, it's important to understand what it is trying to show us. And metrics maybe at every stage in our journey to strengthen the DevOps or CI/CD process. At every level of maturity, we may be wanting to look at a different aspect of the metrics. If we are like trying to strengthen our fearless deployment of deploying more frequently and wanting to have a high reversibility at the same time if there are issues, then you want to kind of make sure you capture your failure rates, you want to capture how often you're deploying. And so it kind of depends on where you are at the journey and what you're trying to focus on.
Very good. Does anybody else have anything they wanted to add? Joost? Anyone?
I'll throw in one quick comment.
All right, take us to the top here. Take us down here, man.
I'm sure everybody will nod their head in reflecting to a moment where in the pursuit of gathering metrics, right? You're trying to make a point, show some data, and you're copying stuff from 3 different places and throwing stuff into a spreadsheet that is really hard to cobble together at the last minute. And so the only point I would make based on that is ingrain the collection of all this data and all those metrics into your processes so that they're easily and constantly retrievable, right? And there's not an actual additional overhead from a human perspective to be able to do anything with those metrics.
And they're less tameable that way as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and to that point, the data will consistently be reported because Betty may report something a little bit different than Bob does because Betty's on vacation or Bob's on vacation, and all of a sudden, you're just looking at 2 different sets of interpretations of how that data should be reported. So very good point, Chafin. Awesome. All right. Well, I really wanted to thank our speakers and our panelists for joining us. And especially I want to thank the audience for joining and participating. We had folks from all over the world on this today. DevOps and financial services, the digital transformations that are occurring, the ones that need to occur. This is extremely important. It's something that we're really very keyed into and focused on. I want to again thank the panelists and speakers for joining us. Your real world experience and your authoritative sort of knowledge of how this works is super helpful for folks who are just getting started or who are looking for a better way. So thank you, and talk to you later.
Thank you.
Thank you,
All
everyone.
right, bye-bye.
Bye.